Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book. Hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to Behind the Book. I'm here with my co-host, Karen.
Yes, you
Anything
are.
Anything new and exciting?
Oh, same old, same old. I've been working on the same book for, it seems like forever. I guess I could look in my records and it's not that far back. But you know how you get into that mode where you feel like this is the book that'll never end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been working on three shorter pieces that I'm doing with some other writer friends. And I feel like they have taken me forever. And they're all Christmas stories. So I'm going to be sick of Christmas by the time Christmas actually comes.
Is that hard to get in the Christmas mood when you're writing a Christmas story in August?
Well, I have been listening to Christmas music, which our guest today talks a little bit about how she works with music. So yeah, I sometimes have a instrumental Christmas album playing or Spotify. There's no albums anymore.
So I can't picture you putting it on the turntable, putting the needle on it.
I'm still bitter that I got rid of my turntable. I should have kept that.
Well, I feel really guilty because I had Greg get rid of his. I was like, "What? We're never going to use this." Right. And he doesn't get rid of things. He's a guy who hangs on to things. But in this instance, he listened to me. And now I feel terrible. But what can I do? It's gone.
All things old come around again, right?
That's
anyway,
for sure.
Well, we had a great time interviewing Xio Axelrod.
She was awesome. And,
she really
I loved the transference from her career as a musician to a novelist and how they influenced each other, particularly in the kind of lyrical writing. I'm actually in the middle of reading her book, the one that's like a huge, huge deal, The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes. And even though my daughter is a guitarist, and I sat outside of the room in Heartland Music every week for several years while she had guitar lessons, sitting on the floor with a book. I actually don't know anything about anything. So as I'm reading it, I was like, I feel like I'm having a little backstage pass.
Very cool. All right, on with the show.
Welcome, everybody. Today, Tess and I are excited to have Xio Axelrod with us. Xio is a USA Today bestselling author of award-winning contemporary romance, romantic fiction, and what she likes to call strange, twisted tales. She grew up in the music industry and began recording at a young age. When she isn't writing stories, she can be found in the studio, writing songs, or performing on international stages under a different, not-so-secret name. She lives in Philadelphia with one full-time husband and several part-time cats. Welcome, Xio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
This isn't in our list of questions, but what do you mean by part-time cats? Was that just a little funny thing, or
no,
is that
I'm
true?
allergic. I'm like deathly allergic to cats and dogs. But my husband is a cat person. He's like the cat whisperer. You know, you go on vacation, you see like cats in the street. They come over to him. Like they run from everyone else. They come to him. So we live in South Philadelphia, and there are a lot of like, alley cats and stuff. So we have two that basically live in our backyard. They have a little cat condo back there. He feeds them twice a day. They have names. They come to the kitchen window and stuff like that. So they're our cats, but they just don't live in the house. So I call them part-time cats.
Oh, perfect. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be a novelist?
Yeah, it was quite by accident, believe it or not. Like you said, I grew up in the music industry, so I was doing music sort of full-time. Was touring in Europe a little bit, and things started to slow down a bit. So I was like, the last full tour that I did, I had fewer shows, so I had more downtime. And sometimes, like, you don't know what to do. You're in a different time zone, and your brain is just kind of going. And I had just started a Tumblr blog not too long before that. And so I don't know, I was watching some show, and the fans were really into, like, the people that were the actors, and they had all this, like, what if this is happening behind the scenes? And I just one night started writing a what if scene, because I write fan fiction as well. So I was like, oh, what if like that was happening and you were two actors falling in love in front of the world on social media? And so I just wrote like, I don't know, a couple hundred words. And the people who followed me, like 30 people, were like, oh, that was really good. You should write some more. So like every chance I had, I was writing like these little scenes and stuff. And like 9 months and 200,000 words later, I had this thing that has kind of gone viral. And I didn't even realize. I didn't realize how many people were reading it and that people were sharing it on Twitter and stuff like that. And a friend of mine she was writing romance at the time. She was like, you know, you've kind of written, not a romance, but like a book with romantic elements. Maybe you should figure out what to do with that. And I was like, well, why? People just read it for free. Like, why would I, you know? She's like, yeah, but they want a bound copy. They want to buy it. And I was like, okay. So I went with her to a conference and found out about this whole world. I didn't even read romance at the time. So like, I didn't know anything about anything, you know? And I was like, wow, people are publishing their own books and they're writing this stuff, and oh my gosh, like this is a whole world I knew nothing about. So it was really by accident that I started writing.
It's fortuitous.
Yeah.
Yes,
you just stumbled into it. And what was the name of that first book?
So the serial was called Starstruck, which is like there's 50 billion books out there with that name. But it ended up turning into, I split it in two, and the first one was Falling Stars and the second one was Starstruck. So, those were like, I didn't release those right away, though. I wrote another book because after I spent some time learning the industry, I wanted to figure out, one, if I could write a story completely from scratch without that kind of prompt. And also if people would buy it, right? So I wrote a novella called The Callum, which I didn't even realize until last year was actually a sort of a Christmas novella. Like it was, I knew nothing. So I wrote this little novella, like holiday jaunt, you know, girl goes to Scotland with her friend and falls in love, and put that out, not thinking that anything would come of it, just sort of the mechanics of putting a book on Amazon and all the different places and stuff. But I had made so many writer friends in that time, like the year that I spent sort of researching the industry, that they were really excited that I'd written a book. And so it just sort of blew up. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I have to figure out what to do, you know? And I sort of started making the slow transition from doing music full time to writing, to like focusing on writing books. So Falling Stars came after that, but The Callum came first.
So your most recent book, The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes, I love that title, has gotten a huge buzz with write-ups in places like Entertainment Weekly, The Washington Post, you know, those two small little rags, and Essence Magazine. In your opinion, what is it about this book that's resonated with readers and the media?
I think it's sort of, rock star romance is not new. But I think it's rare that you see the perspective of women in music. Usually it's the guys who are in the band and the girls are like the groupies or the agent or the lawyer or whatever they are. They're not involved in the music itself. And so I wanted to show, as a musician and someone who didn't live their life, but like, you know, who saw that lifestyle, women rock, women make music, women go through the same stuff, you know, band stuff that the guys do, and in their own trials and tribulations as women in music, and I wanted to show that. So I think, you know, it's sort of hitting at the right time. We're in the rise of women. Like women are coming into their own in so many different fields, and I think music, rock music specifically, is like the last place where women haven't been elevated yet. Like you've seen it in hip hop, you've seen it in country, you've seen it in other arenas, but rock music, women are still on the sidelines. And so I feel like I've seen a lot of readers who are like, yeah, I play guitar, I'm a drummer, and I saw myself, you know, and that's what I wanted. And I think that's resonating with people who were in bands, always wanted to be in a band, you know, love music, and, you know, and love to see women rocking out. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. And also Black women in rock music is also something that we don't see or talk about a lot too. So I think that's another thing that it's hitting at the right time, where we're talking about the stories of Black voices.
I understand that at one time the book was called Exclusive. That was the title. Is that true?
That was for 5 minutes. It was called Exclusive. It had a lot of titles. The original title was Celebrity Skin, which was my working title for a couple of years, even before I signed the deal, when I just had the idea was sort of germinating on my notepads, different places. But the book ended up being different in voice and tone than that title suggests. So I'm going to save that title for something else so nobody can steal that. It's still mine. But we went back and forth about like, okay, so what is this story that I'm telling, or these stories, because there's 4 books in the series. And so like, what are these stories? Who are they really about? Yes, they're romances, but we're really focusing on these girls. And so, yeah, so I think we did a lot of, I mean, there must have been like 25 titles in the original list of like, what will work, you know, and what fits. And this was the one that everybody was like, you know what? I think this is it. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great title.
It's fun.
I think,
yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't realize it's going to be part of a series.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so cool. Did you outline the whole series already, or are you?
Yeah, I proposed. It was Sourcebooks was amazing because they came to me and they said, we really like your voice and your style. What do you have? And I was like, well, I have this idea for this book, this series about this all-female rock band. And they were like, we love it. Let's do it, you know.
So the publisher committed to all 4 books.
Yeah.
Oh, that is wonderful. You don't always have that happen.
No,
And is this the first time you've dealt with a traditional publisher? Were your prior books self-published?
Yes, all my books were self-pubbed. It wasn't the first time I actually worked with an editor, believe it or not, which is like a horrible thing to say as an author, but like I'd never worked with an editor before because I love grammar. I love playing with language, and knowing the rules and breaking them is one of my favorite things. So learning to work with an editor and having somebody else's input on like story and characterization and plot and everything was like, you know, I had to like really suck it up and sort of give over control on like things, you know, we talk about like covers and things like that. Like, and as an indie author, just like as a musician, I was totally I control everything. So it was a real eye-opener to sort of like step back and let other people do things. And then like handing over a book and then waiting a period of time before you can touch it again. Mm-hmm. You know, that was a learning curve as well. But yeah, this was my first time working with any sort of anything.
And how was the editing process? Was that hard to do? Was there a back and forth, or did you disagree on anything?
Well, it's funny because this was my first experience with a traditional publisher. And it was because I heard wonderful things about all different publishers. I also heard a lot of horror stories, you know, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to go through that. But we sat down and they were so enthusiastic about this book. The editor that acquired this series is no longer there and left during my first revision pass.
Oh.
Went to a different publisher. So I had to start the process almost all over again. So I worked with 2 editors on that book. So that was like one of those things you don't want to run to as an author, new to a publisher. You don't want to switch editors in the middle of your project.
No. They call that being orphaned.
You're orphaned. I was really lucky because there was such enthusiasm at the publisher about this book that they immediately handed me off to someone else. And I knew some other authors in situations like that where they wait to see who they're going to be assigned to. So I felt really lucky in that way. And I also went from one great editor to another great editor. But it was sort of like, you know, I'd sort of found a rhythm with the one, and then like I had to start over with someone I hadn't even met. I've never met her. Like we've never met in person. So I was like, okay, here's a new person. I don't know how she works. She doesn't know how I work. Here we go again, you know, but in the end, I think it was the best thing for everyone concerned, like the book and everything, but it was definitely harrowing to go through that as my first time, you know, working with a publisher.
Yeah, exactly. So Publishers Weekly called your book a gift for music lovers, and a lot of reviewers compare your writing to music. USA Today bestselling author Sierra Simone said, Xio Axelrod's writing is like music, central, sweet, and utterly powerful. Is your lyrical writing style a deliberate choice?
I would have said no if you'd asked me that like 5 years ago, but I do think that as a songwriter, I'm used to writing in rhythms, and I think that was just my comfort zone. You know, so when I go back and read like the Callum and Falling Stars and stuff like that, I'm like, oh, you know, I'm breaking rules here even though I don't know what the rules are, you know, because I'm chopping up sentences just so I can get that rhythm, the way that people speak is what I wanted, that cadence that we have when we talk. So I think it is a deliberate choice in that way, especially with dialogue. I want that sort of like back and forth, a call and response feeling in the dialogue rather than just like delivering a line, then delivering another line, and then here's a couple sentences. And you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it is. Yeah, a conscious choice.
And while we're talking about music, you've said that you find it difficult to write without music,
yeah.
Which is the opposite of what a lot of authors say.
Yeah.
What kinds of music do you listen to when you're writing?
Depending on the scene, when I'm really into like heavy action scenes or like heavy dialogue scenes, I will write with instrumental music, like a lot of film soundtracks, like Thomas Newman or like Gavin Luke, stuff like that. Stuff that, depending on the mood, it could be like piano heavy or it could be like something more dramatic. But if I'm writing like a love scene or like a fight scene or something like that, then I'll put on stuff with lyrics that gives me that like whatever mood I'm looking for, you know? So it's definitely, I have I have one massive playlist on Spotify. This is called The Writing Cave. And I think there's like 500 or 600 songs on there, and it's all like Bach to like, you know, the soundtrack from Shawshank Redemption. Like it's like all kinds of mix of stuff on there. And then I have certain albums that I'll put on for certain moods if I'm writing a particular kind of scene.
So hearing the lyrics doesn't mess with the words you're writing?
Not when I'm writing like action or love scenes. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If I'm writing just sort of like, I don't know, like with this series, I'm writing a scene in the studio when they're like working on stuff, then I can't put on something with lyrics. That'll come out of their mouth. So I put on something, you know, maybe if I want something rhythmic, I'll find like a film soundtrack with like a cool groove or something like that. But
so
yeah.
It's almost like a soundtrack to your book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so
I'm a melophile in that I always have music in my mind somewhere. I have a soundtrack to my life. Like I was telling someone a couple months ago that there are rooms in my house that have songs attached to them. I don't know how it happens. It just does. And so like that's really easy for me to translate to my writing or anything else that I do creatively. Like you put the thing on, it puts you in that place. It's almost like setting the scene for yourself, you know? Mm-hmm. And then you write that scene and it puts you in the mindset that you need to be in for that.
That is fascinating. And you know what? I'm going to sound ignorant here, but I'm not familiar with the term melophile.
Neither was I.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me feel better.
No, neither was I, because I didn't know what that was called. And you know, there's a couple of different definitions for it, but it's something that I've heard one or two other people say, just like in the world, not people that I know personally, but it's like, that's the thing that I have, like, you know, and then my father is the same way. We just always have music playing, and you just think that's just a musician. You're just a music person. That a lot of creatives are like that, but it's like that step further where you can't turn it off. And sometimes it's like, I just wish, you know, it's not like an earworm where the song, you hear a song and it just stays in your head. It's just always there. And the songs are always changing. So it is like having a running soundtrack in your head.
And you've had that since you were a kid, or as long as you remember?
As long as I can remember. Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting.
So you have a really fun merch page on your website with products pertaining to your books, phone cases, apparel, pillows. How did that come about?
Well, I am a fandom person. Like I love, I watch a lot of genre TV. I watch a lot of, you know, the stuff that fandoms build around. And they always have merch, you know, you always have stuff you want to wear, that like Firefly t-shirt or whatever it is. And so I was like, yeah, you know, why can't there be fandom in Romancelandia? So I just wanted to have some fan merch of my own. So yeah, it was pretty easy to set up. There are a bunch of sites that you can do that on now. And it's like print on demand, so you don't have to worry about having boxes of t-shirts in your garage or whatever. But yeah, just something fun to invite the reader into your world a bit.
I'm actually surprised more authors don't do that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, oh, what a cool idea.
Yeah.
You know, something different.
Yeah. I have to add the Lilies will have their own merch section. I mean, they already have a t-shirt, but they're going to have like all kinds of merch, and I can't wait to have fun with that as they grow as a band.
Now, you have also mentioned on your website your favorite TV series. I think it's pronounced Skam.
Skam,
am I right?
Yes. Yeah,
which was originally a Norwegian web series.
Yeah.
So, and you actually said that if you were asked about it, we should be prepared to settle in for a long haul because you're so passionate about this series. Can you tell us a little bit about it and why you love it so much?
I'll give you the 30-second spiel, yeah.
Okay.
Skam was a Norwegian television show that lasted for 4 years. It ended 4 years ago, actually. And it was, on paper, it doesn't sound very special. NRK is the network that it was on, and it's kind of like our PBS. It's like the National Public, you know, state-sponsored TV. And they had approached the showrunner saying, we need a show that fits in this demographic, like, think 16 to 18-year-old girls in high school or whatever, like, we need a show that will appeal to them about their issues and stuff like that. And the show creator, Julie Andem, she was like, okay. So she went and interviewed like 1,000 kids and said, you know, what troubles you these days? What do you guys think about? How do you communicate? You know, stuff that showrunners do when they're creating a show. But what happened with it is that they recruited kids who'd never acted before. And they shot it in an actual high school where some of the kids went. and they took dialogue from their lives and they took situations from their lives and they created the show around that. And then the show was presented not like we do in the States and in the UK, where you have a half-hour show on Thursday night at 7 o'clock or whatever it is. They would show clips throughout the week. So like this, we're talking right now at 4 something Eastern time. This conversation would drop at that time, and you get like a notification that there was a clip that dropped, and you get dropped into these people's lives, and you watch the scene, and then the clip would end, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, did you see that? So you felt like a voyeur. You were watching these lives play out throughout the week, and then on Friday, all of the clips would be combined into the episode with the final clip that would, sort of be like the pinnacle part of the episode, like what, the thing that everything was leading up to. And it always ended on some sort of cliffhanger. And so the weekend you'd be like, oh my gosh. And then sometimes you had to wait till Monday for the next clip. Sometimes the clip would drop right after midnight. I mean, it was very much like a viral show, viral marketing, like everybody was on tenterhooks the entire time waiting for the next thing to happen. And they included Instagram posts. They had Facebook stuff. They would drop like text messages between characters. They felt very, very real. And so it appealed to me as a writer because the storylines that they dealt with were things that other shows have dealt with before, but there was so much more realism because these kids were so natural, because they'd never acted before. They didn't have the affectations that actors sometimes have. And it was just very raw and real. And then, of course, that voyeuristic nature of being dropped into the middle of someone's life like that. But then also from a marketing standpoint, I was like, man, this is brilliant. Like, you're constantly waiting for this, for the next thing to happen. So I just fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with the family that they created, because these kids, some of them went on to continue acting. Some of them became other things. And it was fun watching them grow up and stuff like that. And it was just an amazing sort of fandom that grew out of it around the world. It got so big in their 3rd season that the couple that was in that season, Isaac and Evan, they beat in the Entertainment Weekly poll, like all of the American TV shows as for top TV couple, like Walking Dead, Outlander, all those shows, they blew them away. And people were like, what is this tiny show from Norway called Skam? And then other countries created their own versions of the show. So there were like 8 different versions running at one point with like France and Spain and Germany. We had an American version in Austin. And it's sort of a phenomenon. And I think some of them are still running, but the original one ended. It got too big for them to handle, like security-wise, the kids and stuff. So they ended the show, but it was a pretty big deal at the time.
The version that you fell in love with, was it with the Norwegian, the original
Norwegian one? Yeah, I actually learned Norwegian so that I could watch it without subtitles.
Well, and I understand that skam means shame.
Shame, yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
And, I actually did read up a little bit on this after I saw that you were such a big fan. And it was fascinating, that multi-pronged approach that, they had the text messages, and characters had their own Facebook page where they post updates. And like, I thought the same thing, exactly what you said. That's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually doing that with this series. The Lilies have their own internet presence. Their own Instagram account, and their music is available on Spotify, and the club that they play at a lot, the Electric Unicorn, has its own spot. So like slowly I'm building out the universe of the Lilies so that fans like me who love diving into universes of the characters they love will have a place to go and like interact with them and feel like they're part of that world. I think fandom is one of those things, we joke around about it and say, oh, people are just fanatics and they lose their minds, whatever, but anything that makes you that passionate and gives you that much joy, or even angst when you're like want to grab the characters by the throat, like I love that. I live for that. I think like having that sort of thing that moves you that much, to create something like that is like my ultimate goal, is to create a fandom. That's my thing.
Well, and that's what you want as an author. You want to build connections with your readers.
Yeah.
So,
are you familiar with Jennifer Barnes' work?
No.
Okay, so she is a PhD psychologist, I think, and she's studying the science of fandom and what she's found to be the elements of fandom, like what makes people go crazy like that. And she had them all listed out. It was really, really interesting. So she's supposedly going to have a book out about it, but we've all been waiting for a couple of years. But she's literally doing the research, at this university where she works. So it's amazing. What does a writing day look like for you? Are you a plotter or organic?
I I'm a plantser. We'll call it a plantser. I really don't like plotting in terms of like writing things out. And I know people who have like sticky note boards and they use like Scrivener. And I have Scrivener. I'm just about to buy this other thing called Plotter because I need to build a series Bible for this series. Otherwise, I will forget everything. But I do the thing where I let the story play out like a movie reel in my mind for a long time. It could be weeks, it could be months before I start writing it. So like, I know the characters, I know the places they are, I know snippets of dialogue, and I'll write down like, if I get a really juicy piece of dialogue or some scene that I know I absolutely want to write, I'll jot that down. But I don't plot because I prefer to let the character take me where they're going to go. The one time I did plot something out, and I wrote pages and pages and pages. I'm thinking, yeah, I knew exactly what's going to happen here. And I looked back at it and like 75% of it went out the window. So I was like, okay, that was a lot of time that I wasted. But I know for some people that's like bread and butter for them. But for me, it does. I can't even outline a book because once I do finish the outline, like the book is done in my head. So I realized that I need to like think about it and let it marinate and let the characters live in my head and talk and interact and all that kind of stuff before I start writing, you know. So I am plotting in that way, but not in like the traditional way. And then I just let it flow.
So what parts of writing fiction are the easiest for you, and what part do you find the most difficult?
The easiest for me is the dialogue, because I just love people, and I'm like a people watcher or a people listener. I remember going to Scotland a couple of years ago, and we stopped at this restaurant near Loch Ness for lunch, and there were these people, and you know, I love accents. So I was initially drawn to the accents, but then the conversation they were having sort of like caught my attention, and I'm, you know, with my friends and they're talking and I'm like, and I'm like leaning toward the other table to like catch their conversation. I just love listening to how people interact with each other. And like, you can hear sometimes when people are talking, the truthfulness, the level of like transparency, you know, that the other person may not even hear. It's like, ooh, they're not telling them the whole truth there. You can tell from the tone or whatever. Like, I love that. And so I like to try to like weave that into my writing somehow. So I love getting into those. I love writing group set scenes. And in the Lily series, there's a lot of band scenes where the band is talking and their entourage is with them. So there's like, you know, 7-8 people having a conversation about one thing. And I love the back and forth. You know, I'm like a Joss Whedon. Not him particularly because he's problematic, but like the Mutant Enemy camp of writers had this way of writing dialogue that was really snappy, and you still see it in like the shows that we watch now. But Buffy was like a very like snappy, quick, you know, one-liners, but like not in terms of like when we think of one-liners, just drop the line and leave. It was like a series of zingers that just went back and forth between the characters. So I like writing dialogue the most. And then the most difficult is probably description. Like, I'm really bad at describing where people are, like the room or the setting that they're in. I can talk about sounds and I can talk about like what they're eating or whatever, but tell me to describe a room, I'm like, there's walls and a window.
I am the same way, and I have a theory about this,
yeah.
Actually. I think that people like you and me who are fascinated by other people will be able to tell you everything about like some stranger at Starbucks.
Yeah.
You know, what they're wearing, their facial tic, their, you know, everything, because that's what we're looking at and focusing on.
Yeah.
As opposed to how many paintings were on the wall and was it brick or was it, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Because I also am, well, I have a background in acting. There's certain people who, we're just more fascinated by that in life. And so that's what we're going to pay attention to. This is what I tell myself anyway, because I struggle with description.
I will take that.
So is there any writing advice that you would give to those just starting out?
One of the pieces of writing advice that I always hear that bugs me is write what you know. And it's not that you shouldn't write what you know, but don't write only what you know, because writers should always be learning. We should also always be discovering new things and weaving that into the worlds that we write. But the best piece of advice I can give you as a new writer is to read in the genre or subgenre that you want to write in, because readers have expectations. And even if you want to subvert those expectations and give them something they didn't know they needed, you got to know what they're looking for first before you can do that. Because I remember somebody told me when I first got into this world, like, well, if you're going to write a contemporary romance, make sure you don't read any because that'll influence what you're doing. And I'm like, really? Like, shouldn't I be reading those so that I understand what the, you know, tropes of the genre are? So yeah. So, you know, read what you want to write. And also write what you want to write. If you're a nurse, don't just write about being a nurse. Write about other things too, other people.
On those days when you're not feeling like writing, which I know that happens on occasion, do you just push through it? Do you go for a walk? How do you handle it?
If I can step away, then I will. If I'm like on a self-imposed deadline, then I will find one of those things that inspires me, and it's usually a comfort read or a comfort watch or a comfort listen. Something that I know will get my mind getting into like for me, the zone I need to be in is what if. What if in this scene this happens? Or what if in that book this happens? And if I'm not in the what if zone, then I find things that put me there. I have like movies that I've watched a dozen times that I know when I get to that one scene, I'm going to go, well, if they had written that scene this way, you know what I mean? That'll get me going. If I'm on like a publisher imposed deadline and I have to push through, I got to get this in by 3:00 today, then I go into what I call fast draft mode, which is where I basically block everything out. And I don't know how to tell someone to do this because we all have our own methods of like putting your mind in a bubble, but I will get up earlier than I normally will because I'm not a morning person. I can get up in the morning, but my brain doesn't always function early. But I will get up at 7:00. I will shut my door, have my little granola or whatever. I'll shut my door and then turn off Wi-Fi, put on my writing, the instrumental writing thing, and just start typing. And I don't even know what's coming out. I'll use like a blank page and I'll just start typing until something makes sense. And then I'll move to the document that I need to work on. And then I sometimes can push 17, 20,000 words out in a day if I absolutely have to.
Wait a minute. Go back. How many words?
Yeah. And it's not something that I would totally recommend because it is brain frying, but I have done it. I have done it. And it's just one of those things where you're just like, this has to be done. I do not have a choice. I'm going to spit these words out and then give myself enough time to go back and say, this makes no sense at all or whatever. But when I fast draft like for myself, when I'm on a self-imposed deadline, I can do comfortably like 3,000 to 5,000 words a day is like a comfortable pace for me. If I'm just easing into a thing, I can do 500 to 1,000 words. Like I'm not always trying to push at those levels, but if I have to, I will just shut everything else down. Like, don't knock on my door. Don't call me. Don't go online. None of that stuff. I just write. I'll just start typing and just let it go.
Going online, that's the kiss of death, I think, for productivity.
Yeah, especially for me, because I'm a social media butterfly. Like, I love social media. And I just got TikTok, and that's going to be a problem, I know. So yeah. So it's, we have a lot of distractions now. And during the pandemic, when everybody was home all the time, like, it was so much easier because you had, like, all these shows that you catch up on and everybody is around, and if you have kids or whatever, like there were so many distractions. I hats off to anyone who got any writing done in 2020 because it was
a tough year for a lot of people. But yes.
Yeah.
So do you ever have any doubts about a book while you're writing it or after you finish?
Is the question, do I ever not have doubts? Or because that would be the question. Every book, like I still have doubts about Girl with Stars in Her Eyes. Every book I have doubts about whether the choices that I made, like plot-wise or character-wise or whatever. And that's why I think as authors, I don't know an author who doesn't, but I think that's why when readers say things like, oh, that scene or that character resonated or whatever, you're like, oh, I did something right. You know what I mean? Like, it's such validation. Like, oh my gosh, okay, shoo, I don't suck. Every book. Every book.
Well, I think you answered this next question, but I'll ask anyway.
Sure.
How do you know when a book is done? Now, I know when you said you're up against a deadline with your editor, that kind of dictates when it's done, but I know I could endlessly revise. Are you the same way?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny because I fast draft my indie stuff, I don't do pre-orders. So I will, I have a book that I want to put out this fall that I have written maybe 5,000 words on. And I know what's happening right now because I was like, oh, I can take my time and write this draft. And I'm not doing that because it's marinating. So I know that one of these days I'm going to wake up and go, okay, this is it. I'm writing this book. And then when that process finishes, I go through a very quick, because I don't work with an editor with my indie stuff. I go through a very quick editing process, a polishing process, and then I put that book out. So I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on fixing it, tinkering and stuff like that. Once I get to the point of putting the words down on the page, it's almost where I want it to be. in terms of story, flow, characterization, all that other stuff. It's just all the polishing, like the grammatical stuff, the proofreading and all that kind of stuff, word choice, things like that. I think because in music you don't have forever to keep playing with a song, you're paying for studio time, you're paying for musicians and stuff like that. I think I got to a point where I had to say, okay, it's done. The song is done. Like, we've edited it, we've done all the mixing, and all that's just done. Like, I can't keep going in there and fixing it. So I think I brought that over to the writing thing. Because I listen to songs now from like 10 years ago and I go, why did I do that? So it's the same way with the books, but at some point you gotta let it go and move on to something else. So
what you said reminds me, it kind of is almost like if it basically fulfills your vision for the story, then, you're not aiming for perfection, or you aim for it, but you recognize that you don't always get there. Yeah. And you have to live with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always going to be, even in the most perfect title, there will always be something like, oh, if you had just done that thing, it would have made that scene so much better. Like, there'll always be something. But you have to just believe in the story. But if you put out the story, like you said, the story that you want to put out, the characters that you want to put out, the message that you want to put out, then I just can't be completely happy with it, but feel fulfilled that the story is what it's supposed to be.
Do you have an ideal reader in mind while you write?
I think I write for me, honestly, as a reader, because I'm so new to romance still. There's a lot of authors who are like pillars in the industry that I haven't read. Because I came in when all these new authors were coming in, so I was reading all those guys, and like, I'll go back to that, and I never did because there's more authors coming in. So I feel like I write, when I fall in love with a trope or I fall in love with a style or something like that, I'm like, yeah, if I were writing that, this is what I would do. And so I think I'm still in that mode, not to say that I don't have my own voice, I hope I do, but I do think that I'm writing from the perspective of a fangirl rather than the author. I still feel like a baby author fangirl mode, and I think I write for that person. So it's like, oh, I want the cinnamon roll hero. Oh, I want the enemies to lovers thing. Like, I'm still writing from that place.
When you said you started off doing fan fiction, did I get that correct?
Yeah.
There are quite a few authors that got their start that way.
Yeah. There was a huge gap between, I still write fanfic. I write Scam fanfic. I wrote an entire season of Scam when it ended. They did 4 seasons. I wrote the entire 5th season, 10 episodes.
You weren't ready to say goodbye.
Well, it was funny. Like, as soon as the last episode aired, some of my readers on Tumblr were like, "Will you write a 5th season?" And I was like, "No, that's crazy." And then I was like, "Actually, But yeah, I think I wrote Buffy fanfic. Like, that was my thing. But I never, at that time, thought that I would write a book. I was what they call fix-it fic, where there was a situation or episode that I didn't like, and so I would fix it. I would rewrite it or write a storyline a different way and say, oh, they could have gone this way or that way. The Mutant Enemy writers were amazing, but there were places I thought, they left some loose threads, let me fix those, But I know authors who came out of that fandom and immediately went into self-publishing or small press publishing. And yeah, a lot of Twilight fanfic authors became, published authors, and I think Harry Potter was a big fandom for stuff, and now One Direction fan authors.
Oh, I didn't know about that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's quite a few One Direction authors.
Do any of your family members read your books?
My husband read the first 2. He reads genre fiction, like sci-fi, high concept science fiction is his thing, but he was like, oh, it's not my type of book, but really good work, really good writing, hon, and I love the characterization. Like, he broke it down that way. My biggest cheerleader is my dad, which is hilarious, because I did not tell my family when I released that first book, because I wasn't sure how they would take it. I'm writing this sexy romance. And then when they found out, my dad asked me for a copy of the book, and so I sent him a PDF of the book without the sex in it. And he was like, no, I want the one that's on Amazon. And so, and then when I started writing queer romance, I was like, oh, how's he going to take, I was just, so I was like, I don't know how my family's going to deal with this. They are like when this book came out, when The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes came out, they went to the Barnes & Noble like the day before, because they had it out a week early. They went to the Barnes & Noble like the day before the book came out and took pictures with it and like, this is my daughter's book and stuff like that. And I was like, wow. So they're huge supporters. I don't know if they've actually read the books, But they just love everything that's happening with the books, and especially this one with all the recognition that it's gotten. So they're super proud.
That is so cool.
What is something negative that someone said to you that made you want to succeed even more?
How much time do we have? So there's a thing that happens as a Black author in romance when people feel like they can dismiss your books or your writing because you're a Black author and that they can't relate to your writing or your characters or whatever. And that happens in every art medium. Right? That happens on almost every art medium. But it was interesting to come into this world where people are so much more accepting, and there's a lot more cross-pollination that happens in music than in music. So for me to go to a book signing and have people like walk down the aisle and stop at every table and then skip your table and then go to the next table, after like the third or fourth time, I was like, I wonder what it is, and it was like, it's just weird sort of stuff like that. And people ask you really strange questions about your writing when they feel like they can't, that you're other, they other you. And so, yeah, so like I had a review on Amazon once that was like, I'm really glad that the cover shows this woman of color because I don't read those books. And I was like, why are you reviewing it? Why are you giving this book 1 star that you haven't read and you're reviewing it? It was really bizarre, stuff like that.
That is horrible.
Yeah, yeah, it's bad. And I've had authors say things and stuff, and it just makes you do one of two things. Either you pack up your stuff and say, screw this, I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. Or you do what I did, which was dig your heels in and figure out how to do it anyway, not to spite them, but just setting them aside. They're an aside in your career path, mm-hmm. I know people who are like, oh, I'm going to win them over. I don't really care about winning them over. I want to find the readers who will appreciate what I'm trying to write. And those guys can, kick rocks. So, yeah.
You said you wanted to put it diplomatically. That was very diplomatic.
Thank you.
Especially the kick rocks comment. What are you hoping, and I think you addressed this a little bit, that readers will take from your books?
I write the world that I live in, which is very diverse, and it's not by design. It just is. I have so many nationalities in my family, in my friend circle. I have people on every end of every spectrum, around me. Mm-hmm. They're just part of my life. And so I write people like that. Like, I don't write homogenous people. And so I hope that people will walk away with a bigger sense of the world, with a bigger sense of their place in it, maybe. If they are neurodiverse, if they're queer, if they're a marginalized voice, whatever it is, if they say, oh my gosh, I recognize myself in this story or in this series, whatever, that would be like the highest compliment. Like for The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes, like I said before, I had, women saying, oh my gosh, I'm a guitarist, or I'm a Black female rock guitarist. I've never seen myself in a book before. Like that was like, you know what I mean? Like it's I just want to give people a mirror that they can look in and see and feel good about themselves, because so many people have been excluded from the language of romance, from publishing, and from the books. And I don't mean like indie books, because indie books have covered everything always and have always led the charge in terms of diversity. But traditionally published romance is just catching up and has a lot of work to do to catch up. And I think that they're just discovering that, oh my gosh, there's all these audiences out there that we haven't been releasing mm-hmm. books for, where all the indies are like, yeah, I've been raking in the dough because these guys are so.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So I feel like there's always a little corner of the world where someone hasn't seen themselves yet. So I'm just like, it's not like I'm like, oh, let me check off a box. Let me put this type of character in a book. It's just, who have I known? Who have I met through all these years of working in music, or just, working or being in the world? Like, there's all kinds of people that you run into in the coffee shop, in your office, or whatever it is, in your family. And, like, you want to write those people into your book. So that's what I do. So I hope that people will read my books and go, yeah, this is the world I live in, or the one I want to live in.
I know a lot of the reviews for The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes, they use the word authentic, that it has an authentic feel. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I even felt that way. I've never been performed on a stage or was in a recording studio, but you could tell that you as an author really knew your stuff. And so we got to come along for the ride, and
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to invite people into a world that they may not necessarily know or think they know and don't really get because we see the glam and the glitz of the music business, particularly rock and roll has this, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that whole cliche, and, the hotel room parties and all that kind of stuff and the debauchery. And it's really a grind. It's such a grind to be a touring band. Unless you're U2, you know what I mean? Or like Beyonce, where you got like 50 people with you at all times, catering to every whim. It's such a grind to be an up-and-coming band. You start off traveling in your car, then you get like a crappy van, and then you move to a rented bus, and you know what I mean? So like, it's work. It's hard work. And yeah, it's fun, but it's really, really hard work. And so I wanted to give a glimpse into how difficult that work is and how people bond when they're stuck in it together. That found family thing was a really big aspect of this series.
All right. So to wrap things up, we always like to do these fun extra questions. We copied the Actors Studio. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Oh, man. I'm allergic to a lot of foods, so that's a hard question. But one that I could eat that I won't, it's probably going to be okra. Because I'm a big texture person, and the texture of okra is like, ugh, like the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. And you go to like New Orleans, and they're like, oh, it's in the gumbo, you won't taste it. I can taste it. I can taste it. I can feel it in there. Like, just don't try to fool me with it, please.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, fun. I think, and it's probably because she was such a huge influence for Tony in this book, is Her. It's an artist named Her. Mm-hmm. She is Tony. She's like a multi-instrumentalist, singer, guitarist, and I'm not a multi-instrumentalist like that, but I think like our personalities are pretty similar, and I wish I had her hair. so I think, yeah, something like that. Or
what superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Oh, teleportation. Like,
good one.
No question.
Yeah, that's mine too.
Yeah.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
I don't know. I don't believe in guilty pleasures, because I think if it brings you pleasure, you shouldn't feel guilty about it.
All right.
That's a valid answer.
Yeah, I can't say that I have one.
I think that's good.
I love that. That's very healthy. What's the worst job you've ever had?
Oh, man. I had a job for about 2 hours working at a chain record store in, like, the mall. And, like, I'm thinking, oh, it'd be so much fun to work at a music store. And I went in for my interview, and they were really cool. And then, like, I went to the second interview, and they were like, here's the uniform you have to wear. Here are the things you can't say. Here's blah, 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 blah. And they handed me this manual that was, like, you guys can't see it, but I'm, like 8-inch thick binder for a record store. And I was like, wow. So I went home, and I was like, okay. And I got dressed the next morning, and I went there, and I just, like, put the binder and the uniform in a bag and stuck it, like, up against the grate. And was like, nope. And just, like, left. Like, nope, not gonna do that. Yeah.
So the store wasn't even open yet?
Nope.
And you just left it?
I left it. I was like, I know myself. This is not going to work out. So, yeah, that's...
If you could instantly become an expert at something, what would it be?
Oh, man. I love learning languages. So it would probably be some sort of, like, polyglot, instant, absorb a language instantly thing, if that was a thing.
What's your favorite scent?
It's a toss-up between, like, a campfire and fresh rain, like rain on cement. Like, fresh cement gets wet from the rain, like that smell.
Let's see. What's the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
The most terrifying thing I've ever done is probably when I moved to the UK. I didn't tell anybody I was going to do it, and I just bought a one-way ticket and got on a plane and went and stayed with some friends on their couch for a couple of weeks until I got acclimated. And I'd never been there, so yeah. It was my first international trip, and I just moved.
That was brave. We're crazy. We're both.
Stupid. It was stupid. I could have died like a million times. I have stories about that time. But anyway.
What's something you're really bad at?
Saying no.
That can be a problem.
Yeah, it is. I'm learning. Like, I remember a couple of years ago, someone was like, it's the year of saying yes. And I was like, that's like every year for me. So it was a year of saying no. When people were like, can you do this? No.
So you're more of a people pleaser.
Definitely, yeah.
If you could live your life over again, would you?
All of it? No, yeah, because despite any hardships or whatever, I think I turned out okay. So
yeah, and the adventure still continues.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Well, this has been amazing. We're so excited that you were able to come on.
Thank you so much.
Learning about you and your books, and I'm looking forward to reading some of them now. I can't wait. I'm like, which one am I going to start with? Which should I start with?
Oh, I would say The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes, but it's The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes I love it, but it's a very different book for me. Like, I tend to write higher heat and like more angst in this book. This is a very hopeful book, and I think that's wonderful. So it's hard for me to say start with that, because then you'll be completely surprised by the other stuff that I write. But I think if you start with my first book, The Callum, which is just a novella, it's a quick hit. It's got a lot of heart and humor in it, and so does The Girl with Stars in Her Eyes. I think they're good bookends to each other. It's also not as spicy as the stuff in the middle. So if you start there, I think you'll be okay.
I love it. All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to following your career from here on out.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so nice talking to you guys.
Thanks, Xio.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.